Hey, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast series. This is where we're getting into the weeds to figure out how do I need to live in this modern world to restore a sense of flourishing in my life? Today, I'm so excited to bring on a dear friend, Sujantra McKeever. I met Sujantra in 2010, which is now 14 years ago, because he owns the yoga studio in San Diego where I did my very first teacher training. He was very much involved with that program, but even at the time that I found the studio all those years ago, it was quite a big operation. So for the yoga pose part of the program, he had a different teacher who had an assistant, and she taught us all about the yoga poses and the anatomy as it relates to the yoga poses. But then there was another section of teacher training that was dedicated to yoga philosophy and meditation. And this is the part of the program that Sujantra led. He also led a few free meditation classes every week at the yoga studio. And at the time, he was even doing this free yoga philosophy book club. And so there was lots of opportunities at that time for me to study with him and learn from him, which I took full advantage of. First, because we got credit for it as part of our yoga teacher training. But second, it really grabbed onto me. I guess I was looking for something to believe in, some sort of spiritual element in my life that would pull me along a beautiful path in life. Because I think even at that point in my life, I was quite young. I was 21 or 22. But even at that point in my life, I could feel that not having that sort of spiritual thread could lead me down some pretty ugly places. I learned so much from Sujantra. He actually was the one who taught me how to meditate. And he's been involved in meditation since he was a teenager. And he'll tell us that full story of how that came to be, because that's a pretty odd thing for a teenager to get involved in meditation of all things. So the fact that he was driven towards that, interested in it, set him off in a very unique direction in life. I really think of Sujantra in some sense as a father figure to me, because he brings this sturdiness of character and confidence into the situations that he's in. So even if there's a situation where there's high stress or high anxiety because of other people in the group or because the situation itself might be stressful, you can always count on Sujantra to be the level-headed one in that group and to hold the group's energy in a pretty elevated space. And I think this is one of the reasons why 14 years later, I still want Sujantra in my life and I have him in my life. I've worked with him in all different aspects of his yoga business. He actually was a mentor to Ollie and I when we opened our yoga studio in Chicago in 2014. And then since I moved back to San Diego, now we like to get together to go sailing and hang out at his house and play music. And it's just a really great time. And so I wanted to bring you behind the brain of this person who has a very unique relationship with life and some really important perspectives that we can learn from. And my spiritual journey, ultimately, when I moved to Chicago in 2012 initially, so I grew up in San Diego, I was here, I did my yoga teacher training and was really involved in the yoga community. And then I moved to Chicago, and that sort of made me a little bit of a yoga orphan in this new space. I sort of branched away from where he is spiritually into a different angle. And so you'll hear us kind of struggle to define our terms. I don't think struggle is the right word there, but you'll hear us talk about defining our terms in some of these areas where my spiritual sense making is locked in a little bit differently than his is. And so I think both of those perspectives can be really, really helpful, because life is full of this stuff that's difficult to understand and wrap our heads around. So I really hope you love this episode. I'd love to know what you get out of it. And by the way, stick around at the end, because that's when I'll share my story of the route that my spiritual path took once I moved to Chicago. I think that'll help make a little bit of sense of the area that we get into during this conversation, as it pertains to reincarnation, which is one of the topics that we talk about. But we also talk about what his life has looked like because of meditation, what his life might have looked like if he didn't find meditation, how you can get started as a very beginner, as somebody who might feel really anxious, or you sit down to meditate and it's not this pleasant experience, right? It's this experience where you're like kind of fighting it the whole time and you want to get out of it. So if you're in that place, what do you do? And then what are those sort of milestones and benefits along the way that you can look at to gauge, my life is getting better over time? Please, my friend, enjoy the episode, listen to it, stick around for the end. And without further ado, let's go. Well, Sujantra, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Me too. Glad to be here.
I'd love to begin this conversation by asking you, as a lifelong meditator, why do you meditate?
Right, lifelong. So basically, started at about age 15, 16. And the reason I started is really still the reason I continue. So I started for two reasons. One was to deal with life in high school. I'd gone from an idyllic grammar school experience with 30 kids in the classroom. I'd known them all for 8 years. I went from that experience to high school, all boys high school, which I liked because we had connections and dances with the girls' high schools. 200 guys, super competitive. I got knocked off the basketball team, which had been a lot of my identity going through high school. And so just dealing with society and all of the things going on was a big part of why I got into meditation, because I was analyzing myself a lot, dealing with social situations, a lot of self-conscious, not like, the blossoming of self-consciousness, but like being self-conscious and endless introverted thinking about myself and how I'm being perceived socially. So I wanted to deal with all of that. That was one big reason I got into meditation. The other was a fascination with the mystical and the psychic side of life and the powers of mind. So those two things fascinated me. Both avenues, as I pursued them, pointed towards meditation, pointed towards the ability to calm and quiet the mind, often through breath control. And so did it. It worked. I got what I was looking for and more. It showed me another whole vista. And so then, and that's why I've continued. What do I do with my outer life? How do I navigate the karmic field that I live in? And how do I keep growing in that mystical dimension? So both those things are still going on.
Have you ever thought about what your life would look like if you didn't find that?
No. To tell you the truth, No. I guess if I want to do that, I could look at people who I can look at peers of mine, guys I went to high school with or people I went to college with, and see how their lives went. And especially in terms of people getting involved in drugs, getting involved in too much alcohol, getting into relationships that didn't lead to satisfaction. So I can look at the frequency that I see, let's say for alcohol use. I can see the frequency of alcohol use and misuse of guys that I went to high school with. And I think, wow, if I wasn't making really deep, informed decisions in my life, things may have been much different. I may have turned to other things to find peace, because our culture is so rife with the sex, drugs, and alcohol is where happiness lies. So I could easily conjecture that I would have gone deeper down that path.
Right. Because there's two factors. One was you were sort of like as a fish, you found a new pond, and
Right.
it's like, how do I swim in this new pond? Suddenly I'm very self-conscious, and I don't feel like I can just be myself in an easy way. I feel like I always have to second guess how I'm showing up in places, and how things are turning out around me is not how I maybe would wish they would be. So now I'm second guessing myself even more. But lucky for you, you actually had an interest in something more mystical and your mind. And I don't think that that occurs to a lot of teenagers, or let's be frank, like even adults, if we're going through this sort of inner tumultuous time, most of the time the most attractive option is the sex, drugs, alcohol arena. So why do you think it was that you had that interest in the mystical and in the mind area that sort of prompted you to problem solve in a more productive avenue?
Very good question. I would say two things. One was I watched myself carefully, and I would notice that the negative self-consciousness, let's call it, or we'll call it negative self-consciousness. What I could lessen it, or it would disappear when I was playing sports and when I would go on long runs, and I would just focus in on my breathing, and I'd really be able to get out of my head. So I knew that I was conscious that there was a way out of it. And for me, it was most quickly, it was sports. So I was aware that there was a way out. And then when I started to dabble in meditation a little bit or read about it, breath control, which is what I noticed was occurring when I was playing basketball or running, was a lot of breath control. The other thing is, to quote the great Swami Vivekananda, he says that to be born in the church is a blessing, to die in the church is a tragedy. And I was born into the Catholic faith. And so I had the experience of the mystical quite a bit. I'd go to church with my parents. I went to a Catholic grammar school and Catholic high school. So there was that church element, that mystical element. You go into church, all the quieting stops, it gets quiet. The head nun of our church played the organ, so haunting, beautiful sounds, incense going, and reading. My favorite was like the Old Testament stories of Jesus and his disciples, and deep moral principles guiding one's life, and the miracles and the mysteries of life, and all of that biblical intrigue. And so that really helped to open my mind to the mystical. And of course, the Swami Vivekananda quote refers to the fact that it's a blessing to be born in an environment where your mind is open to the mystical and religious. It's a tragedy to die in the church. By that, he means ultimately, as individuals, we need to step beyond the thoughts or ideologies of other people and enter into our own heart of pure spirituality, which is a step beyond religion or set dogmas.
What is spirituality if you had to define it?
Spirituality, that's a question that's explored quite a bit in my book called Paths Are Many, Truth is One. And I would say spirituality is the common practices that underlie all of the world's religions and spiritual traditions. And spirituality is basically connecting with that deep spirit within ourselves, that's feeling of joy, that feeling of happiness, that feeling of the mystery of life and the joy of life. And the spiritual journey is getting out of our minds, getting out of our thought forms and even our limited body consciousness, and getting into a deeper sense of self.
So with spirituality, it's getting in touch out. So a thought has a beginning and an end. A feeling has a beginning and an end. But there is something within us that has been present with us our entire lives that doesn't really seem to fluctuate. Even if we're like really sick, we have like the flu, we're throwing up all day, we just feel like crap. There's still like this element of our existence, the sort of beingness or existingness of us that feels unchanged by the fact that we're sick and throwing up. So is that what you're kind of, and I don't even know if I'm explaining this in a way that resonates with anyone else besides myself. I'm just trying to lock in my personal experience and see if I can identify that within me that is the same as what you're talking about with getting in touch with on the spirituality side. So is that, if you know what I'm talking about, is that what spirituality is? It's getting in touch with that aspect of ourselves.
Is spirituality getting in touch with what aspect? The part that you like, the part that's always there, whether you're sick or well, or
right, and unchanged, and it's sort of like this. It is the constant and otherwise ever changing experience of living.
That's well put. So a beautiful analogy from the writings of Ramana Maharshi would be that this part of you that you're talking about that's unchanging, that's always present, would be like the movie screen. The movie screen is always there. The film is projected on the screen. Images, fires, life and death, all of this happens on the screen. And we become lost in the image and the story. And we forget that all of this is supported by a blank white screen. And remembering, so that backdrop, you could say, the self or the deepest part of ourself is that backdrop, that screen upon which all of this plays out. And so being able to be in touch with that constant part of yourself that is there regardless of what the thoughts are, is there regardless of whether things are going well or not, or your body is aging, or whether you're in pleasure or pain, that steadiness that you can find.
And so how do you use meditation to get more in touch with that part of yourself?
Well, there's a lot of different meditation techniques, and almost all of them in one way or another help you to do that. So if we take a very basic meditation technique, for example, watching our breath, which you find throughout all the meditation traditions, focus on breath. And the basic instruction that's given is focus on your breathing. And when thoughts come up or bodily sensations arise, let them come and go and stay rooted in your breath. Stay rooted in your breathing and watch thoughts come and go, watch bodily sensations come and go, and see that they're transitory, whereas your breath is steady. Now, the breath is more steady and more ever present than the thought forms. or the bodily sensations. So that's like a stage of learning. But then there are deeper levels of self than the breath. But the breath is a traditional, wonderful place to start the meditation journey, because most often we're swept away by thoughts or bodily sensations or physical urges. We're swept away by them. And so to be able to watch them come and go without clinging on to them and making that our reality is a big first step in the meditation journey.
And so this has been my experience, and in talking with other people, I've heard this a lot, which is that, sort of like the beginner meditator is sort of coming up against some predictable problems when they sit down to meditate, which is the getting.
Instead of problem, we could say a predictable organism or a predictable reality that all human beings are dealing with.
Yes, thank you for rebranding my language here. I appreciate it. I do. Okay, so it's a predictable, maybe even pattern that all humans are gonna experience this, which is I'm going to get lodged in my thoughts. It's like I'm thinking, I'm in the stream of consciousness of my thinking, and I'm not even aware that I am doing that. I'm almost like 10 thoughts in or 12 thoughts in before I even remember, like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be paying attention to my breath. And this happens to people, and they get frustrated, and they think that they're not doing it right because they think that they should be able to sit down and just be able to keep their attention glued to their breath, and that if they were the perfect meditator, their attention would never wander to the thought. Or another thing you were talking about, like bodily urges, like anxiety or antsiness can really come up and have a negative impact on people to the point where they're like, I can't sit down to do this. So if we're talking about, that beginner stage of encountering that pattern, what advice do you have for the very natural tendency of our attention to get swept away in the thoughts and the feelings and the urges? How should we be thinking about that and kind of coaching ourselves through that process when we sit down to meditate?
Well, that is an issue that I think my spiritual teacher, my meditation teacher, Sri Chinmoy, he addressed very well, because he was dealing, he came to the US in the 60s. He was dealing with a lot of young people wanting to learn meditation, a lot of restlessness when we're young. There's an eagerness, but there's also a restlessness. And in the issue you brought up, the two things that he taught me and he taught all the students, that occurred to me initially is, first of all, instead of making the meditation practice just focusing on breath, give yourself something more imaginative to focus on. So one of his techniques was visualize within your spiritual heart a beautiful light or a flower, and visualize that each time you breathe in, you're breathing in life energy into your heart. And as you exhale, the beautiful fragrance of the flower is spreading out throughout your body. So, because we are as human beings, we're very creative. We have imaginations. We can visualize things. And so sometimes focusing just on breath can be rather dry. So he suggested bring in imagination, create visualizations, guided visualizations for oneself. The other thing he suggested, when you mentioned restlessness and some anxiety and stuff, he suggested exercise. So to a beginner meditator, he suggested first get some exercise, whether that's go for a run, a walk, do some yoga, work things out of your body on the physical level so that you can sit down and relax. Just like when you take a restless dog for a walk, And then he comes back, he's chilling out, he lays down, goes back to napping. Same thing with ourselves and our bodies. A lot of stuff can be worked out physically.
Ah, that's so great. Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer, his whole thing is exercise, discipline, affection in that
Ah,
order. And I
right,
can almost
okay.
think about this in like taking it to the human, applying it to the human is exercise, but discipline could be this meditation aspect of things.
Definitely. And what was the
Interesting.
third one? Exercise, discipline, and then what?
Affection.
Affection. And so, in terms of affection, what spiritual teachers, or in the case of Sri Chinmoy, what he would do is after a long meditation, there'd be a nice meal, or there'd be in the Indian tradition what's called prasad. So someone that was attending the meditation might bring some fruits or some sweets. And so after the period of discipline, then everyone relaxes, enjoys some social time, and possibly eats some nice food. So being affectionate towards ourselves and honoring our efforts. So that's where community can be very important, and also just learning to celebrate your victories. And every time you sit down and meditate and make that effort, that's a victory. And so to do something nice for yourself after.
Mm. Wow, I never put it into that frame before. I like
Well,
to
Caesar Milan did it for us.
You did. I love
Yeah,
it.
good man.
So Sri Chinmoy, and I remember back in the day when I was meditating with you, there was also kind of a softening the eyes and focusing on a flame, a candle flame in front of
Yep.
us.
Right.
So that technique, in addition to what you're saying of like visualizations, and also focusing on the breath, would it be fair to say then that all of those techniques are designed to give our attention some sort of anchoring point so that it's drawn away from the chatter of the mind and the feelings and urges that are coming up in the body? We have something else to do with our attention. And the goal of sitting down to meditate then is to remind ourselves as often as we can to anchor the attention back to that, whatever we have chosen, be it the breath or the candle flame or the visualization. And that is actually what the goal of is during that time in meditation.
Well, I would take a step back to day-to-day experiences. And
Okay.
so ultimately meditation is deeply satisfying. And to go into a meditative state is extremely satisfying in and of itself. And so if you take a step back and just look at your day-to-day experiences, I'm going to venture to guess that the most satisfying experiences are the ones where you're really focused, whether you're really focused on how good that jacuzzi feels, or you're really focused on how good your body's feeling while you're in the middle of exercise, or you're really focused on that movie you're watching and you don't want anything to disturb you because you're so riveted, or the book you're reading. You're reading that novel or that book, and the world around you could be falling apart and you're not even aware of it. And so when we bring our mind into a very focused, concentrated state, there we are escalating our feeling of reality. Because when our mind is dissipated, we don't have as much contact with reality. We're just in a fragmented state. But when we pull our mind together, we start to really feel alive. And so that's what the meditation techniques do, is they help you to focus on something and try and let other thoughts subside, and root yourself in a candle flame, in a mantra, in a thought process or an internal investigation or a contemplation of something beautiful, or a beautiful thought or idea, an image or a vision that you want to manifest. And so these times when we concentrate our mind feel really good. And that's what you're doing with the meditation. You're learning to go from a dissipated mind, a distracted mind, to a focused consciousness, which inherently feels good.
Yes, that makes so much sense. I also think it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of people who have tried meditation and sort of arrived at a conclusion that it doesn't work for them because they never actually feel, I don't, you said meditative state. I assume like they're never really kind of getting into that meditative state. And so that it doesn't actually feel good to them. They're in a place where it's constant mind chatter and maybe a few seconds or moments of relief when they remember to pull their attention back to something else, the present moment, the breath, what have you. So is meditation really for people who already know what it is to focus their minds? Is there some sort of prerequisite, something else that we should be focusing on, or skills we should be looking to build up within ourselves that make us ripe for the activity of meditation? You said exercise, so I'm putting that into this category. Is there anything else?
Well, two things we have there. One, you said, what makes one ripe for learning meditation? The other is people who say, I can't meditate.
Okay.
So when Paramahansa Yogananda, famous spiritual teacher, traveled to India and he met the great teacher Ramana Maharshi, and Yogananda was basically, one of his goals was to propagate and spread meditation throughout the Western world. And Ramana Maharshi lived in India, beautiful ashram. And so Yogananda asked him if he had any advice. And Ramana Maharshi said, you can't teach meditation by a formula. In other words, each individual needs some specific personal instruction. And so myself as a meditation teacher, when I meet someone who wants to learn to meditate, I ask them a couple of questions and find out something that they do in their life that can be a link to meditation. So for example, if someone's brand new to meditation and they say, hey, I really want to learn to meditate, I'll ask them, well, what do you like to do to relax? And let's say they say, I like to go to the gym. Okay, then after your great gym workout, go sit at a quiet bench, put on some earphones, listen to some beautiful music or a meditation, guided meditation, and sit there for 5 minutes. Then they're going to have an entry point. Or let's say the person says, I love to draw. That's how I relax in the evening. I love to draw. So then I'll say, okay, while you're sitting there, draw a mandala, do a mandala, and then start to try to visualize the mandala inside your heart. So you're linking the practice of meditation to something they already do. And that's, I think, part of the art of teaching people meditation is let's connect this with something I already do. And so when I'm teaching a group of people to meditate, I start the process with the physical body. We all have physical bodies and we all like to relax. So let's focus in on our breathing. As we breathe in, become aware of the muscles in our forehead. As we exhale, let those muscles release and relax. So you go through like a body scan. And boy, after a relaxed body, who wouldn't want to relax their senses a little bit? Relax their breathing. And so the link is important.
Mm.
Then the other thing you mentioned is, why is someone ripe for meditation? Why as a 16-year-old was I interested in meditation? Why as a 12-year-old did I find a book on India? And why was I fascinated by the pictures of the yogis sitting on the banks of the Ganges? Why does another 12-year-old open up a book of automobile engines and become fascinated with automobile engines and spends his life as an engineer? So I think there's two basic ways to look at it. One is reincarnation, and the other is just chance. And so I think as individuals, we have to wonder about life and why things happen and why people have different interests, and look at the possibility that it's past lifetimes of practicing meditation or trying to learn meditation that have led to an interest in this lifetime.
That's so interesting. With regards to reincarnation, I've kind of gone back and forth on this, and I still don't really know exactly what to think about that whole idea. Because so the way that I understand consciousness, I think this will help with the whole reincarnation thing. So the way that I understand consciousness is that it is that sort of seed within me that I was referencing, that part within me that I was referencing earlier, which is it's always here. It doesn't fluctuate. It is the observer of everything around it that's fluctuating. All the cells in my body are regenerating. I don't have any of the same cells in my body that I had when I was born, but somehow I'm still the same. There is the part of me that in the truest, deepest part of me feels like it's the same. And it feels like everything else is like crystallizing, changing, coming and going around that. My body, my thoughts, my emotions. That part of me, when I go in and I look and I scan and I say, let me get to know that part of me a little bit, feels borderless. It doesn't seem like it has a beginning or an end. It doesn't feel like it's actually contained within the walls of my skin, but that actually it feels, if I really go in and investigate deeply, that my body exists within it. And so it is actually much larger than me, and I have no evidence that it's mine alone. Actually, maybe you're part of it. Maybe this computer that is sitting in front of me is part of it. Maybe consciousness is this undifferentiated mass of existence that's maybe not even mass, and everything is contained within it, of it, by it, and it's sort of just tumbling, and different things are appearing in it. Shakespeare's appearing in it, FDR's appearing in it, you're appearing in it, I'm appearing in it, Donald Trump's appearing in it. The whole gang is here. So when I think about consciousness with that definition, it's not clear to me then what is the piece of me that would be reincarnated, that would be like mine in this life, but then also mine in some future life and in some past life. So, what's your take on reincarnation? Like, what's your definition of that? And what is the piece within you that you think is actually reincarnating from life to life?
Well, a good way to start to contemplate it in our own lives, because I think ultimately that's what brings clarity on reincarnation is personal experience. And so a nice starting point is in the Indian tradition when the physical body dies. In the West, we might say, okay, their body, Joe is dead, but his soul has gone to heaven, possibly, or his soul is now going to reincarnate or go to heaven or be with God, which is an oversimplification. And so in that oversimplification, I think we lose the ability to investigate it. So in the Indian tradition, it's said that the body is there, it's motionless, and breath, prana, has withdrawn. Okay, so prana, life force, has withdrawn from the body and is drawing back into mind. Drawing back into mind. Now, we're aware of our mind in terms of our surface thoughts, but we're not aware of our subconscious mind. It boils up every once in a while, but we're not very conscious of our subconscious mind. So basically my point to people is most people don't know their inner landscape well enough to really judge death and reincarnation. Some people say, well, if I've lived before, how come I don't remember? Well, do you remember what you had for breakfast 16 years ago on a Tuesday morning? No. So again, breath withdraws into mind. Breath withdraws from the body. Breath draws back into mind. Mind draws back into heart. And then heart is where all the samskaras, which are called the latent tendencies, samskaras in the Sanskrit is like seed thoughts or the longings or desires. Because we all die, most people die with desires in their heart. You know, the person who spent their life trying to make money to find happiness on their deathbed, they're rich, but they're lonely and there's no one there. So they could conceivably die with a longing in their heart to be happy, to be loved. So we all spend our lives trying to fulfill our desires. And if you believe the universe is alive and a conscious, that the universe is alive and we're part of that aliveness, then if we've gotten this lifetime in which we try to fulfill our desires, why would all of a sudden that process end? You know, it doesn't really make sense that in an infinite universe that we have one lifetime of being, and then what happens? We go to heaven, or we're cast into eternal hell. It doesn't really make sense in terms of the evolution of consciousness that we only have one conscious existence like this. And in the Indian philosophy, it's said that the human incarnation is the greatest boon in the universe. To have a human incarnation is the greatest moment for spiritual progress. And so the idea is that spiritual progress doesn't happen in the full expanse of it doesn't happen in one lifetime, that we all have the potential for the conscious experience of nirvana or the kingdom of heaven within. And that to think that we can do that in one lifetime is not being realistic. And a good way you can explore that within yourself is to ask yourself, what have I learned so far in life? You know, you're in your 30s, I'm in my 60s. If I was to write down the top 5 lessons I've learned in life, they're good, but they're not like, okay, I experienced nirvana. I felt my oneness with all of humanity. It's like, okay, I learned to be more humble. I learned that when I'm kind to others, it feels really good. So the lessons of life take a while. And so we want to be realistic about the expanse of what's possible and that it doesn't happen in one heartbeat. So Sri Chinmoy, he used to say, just on the outer plane, you have to spend, 20, 25 years of study and school and learning to become a doctor. And that's just outer learning. That outer learning is very simple compared to inner learning. Like the inner learning that has to happen to go deep into meditation or to experience nirvana or samadhi or the state of liberation or to get to very subtle realms of mind takes a lot more intensity and time and study and energy than it does to master an outer skill. And that's why people who are born with the predilection towards meditation and contemplation, might spend their entire life in a monastery or chanting a mantra and really digging into that inner school, because there's a lot to learn and process in the contemplative life.
Interesting. Well, if that is true, which we can't really ever verify, but if it is true.
Whoa. We can't ever really verify, but as individuals, we can verify a feeling within oneself, as you've done earlier, of timelessness, of a part of you that is not limited to the physical body.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and if you take the idea of having a physical body as a great opportunity, then it makes sense that the universe is going to give you another shot at another physical body once this one wears out. Or you'll take some form, because you need form and you need some sense of being to experience things.
Yeah, I guess I always conceptualize, and not always, but for the past many, decade or so, I've been conceptualizing it as once this form is done, the beingness of us is still here. It's just back to being part of the undifferentiated beingness that, of course, then will go take another form in some way. But the link between me, Brenton, then this other form in the future, the link between those two is the part I think that is breaking down in my logic sphere. But
Well,
I see, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, but I was going to give you more credit because I also see how what you're saying makes sense and actually creates maybe more meaning and purpose for this life, because I've gotten the boon, as you say, of being the human.
Yeah.
And there are desires in my heart. And
Unfulfilled.
unfulfilled. 100%. There are unfulfilled desires in my heart. And my interests are different than anybody else's interests. And so there is that unexplainedness of like, well, why is the interest in this down this path and not this path? And so you're saying, well, that could be chance, but it could also be that you have been evolving through different manifestations and different forms along the way. And now you have this boon. Maybe you've had this boon before, even as a human. Maybe this is not your first time being a human. And if you're interested in these matters, it probably isn't, according to this. So I want to give you that credit. I'm just sort of like also peeling back the curtain and showing you how this has sort of like logically found its home inside my brain at the moment.
Well, right. Well, the thing is, you said you don't see a link between Brenton and the next form she takes.
Yes.
And I'm saying the link is the unfulfilled desires.
The
longings. Because if a beautiful way, I think, to think of the universe is as a wish fulfilling tree. The idea that there's a magical tree and you reach and you grab a leaf and whatever your wish is comes true. So if we look at the world and existence, reality, as a wish fulfilling reality, in other words, its consciousness is so magical that what we project can become reality, which happens when we dream at night. We fall asleep, we're laying in our bed, our body is, we're unconscious of our body, and yet we're having a world of experience. So what creates the dreamscape is our subconscious and our unfulfilled desires, our longings, things that aren't resolved. And so the link between Brenton currently and the next form she takes is going to be the same thing. It's the link between you in the waking state and the dream you create. You don't all of a sudden dream you're somebody else. You don't dream you're in a place you've never been. Everything in the dreamscape has a link to the waking state. So the same thing, everything in this lifetime has a link to the past. And that's the other way to understand death and to understand reincarnation, is if you meditate upon your current markings, or like your current desires or your current longings or current characteristics you have, and really dive into them, you'll see what they're linked to. They're linked to your past lives, just like those links are going to carry forward. But at the same time, Sri Chinmoy, again, the wisdom of my teacher, he said, don't spend all your time trying to figure out your past lives or your future lives. Live in the moment and find God in your heart here and now. And so again, reincarnation is fascinating. It can be inspiring. But we don't want to get lost in the what ifs. We want to ground ourselves in, let me experience my highest potential in this moment.
What a beautiful way to end the whole conversation here.
And it's really just beginning.
I know. We'll have to do it again. Thank you so much for joining today, Sujantra. I'm really looking forward to reflecting on this conversation later today. For anybody who's listening who wants to get to know who you are, what you do, maybe even wants to work with you, how can they do that?
Well, basically, if you live in San Diego, I own a beautiful yoga studio, Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga. We have a lot of yoga classes that you pay for, but we also have free meditations and musical mantra evenings, many of which I lead. So there's that way to connect with me in person. I also have written a number of books, which are on Amazon. So if you search Sujantra McKeever, McKeever, you'll find those books. And then also on Instagram, on Pilgrimage Yoga, we broadcast my Tuesday 7:30 p.m. evening meditation. And
you're still doing that. That's
still
awesome.
doing it, going strong. And also I mentioned my teacher, Sri Chinmoy, looking in his books. That's where I've gotten a lot of my wisdom. I mentioned Ramana Maharshi, and I also mentioned Swami Vivekananda. So all of those are great resources for the things we're talking about today. Amazing. And good job, Brenton. I love your podcast. Glad to be on it.
Thank you, Sujantra. I'm excited to invite you on again. Next time, hopefully we'll have less tech issues.
Right. All right.
All right. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Alrighty, my friend. That concludes the conversation with Sujantra McKeever. Take a look at the show notes section because I've linked up all of his books and resources. As you can imagine, there's tons of ways to learn with Sujantra online. So even if you're not in the San Diego area, you can still benefit from all of the wisdom that he has to share. And since you stuck around to the end, I'll take the opportunity to share the backstory behind my spiritual perspective. When I got together with Ollie in Chicago, Ollie was following teachers like Wayne Dyer, who is very much in the manifestation realm if you're not familiar with his work, but you might be familiar with Wayne Dyer's work because he's written dozens of books and has done TV specials and has wonderful wisdom to share on how to dance with life so that it's working in your favor. Somewhere around that time, Ollie also was finding Muji, and I asked him the other day how he found Muji, and he didn't really know, but it was just sort of serendipity from the YouTube algorithm. Muji practices something called Advaita Vedanta in Sanskrit, which translates into non-duality. In other words, not two. And the way that Muji teaches, the way that so many spiritual teachers teach, is that they have talks with their followers or their community. And sometimes those talks will be sort of lecture style, but often they'll be based on questions and answers. And you can imagine this is something very easy to port out into the online world. This was probably 2012, 2013 that I started watching these videos with Ollie from Muji, who would be answering people's questions that were these very existential questions about how to be happy and how does it really work and how to manage all of the suffering that comes up as a natural course of life. The way Muji was talking really resonated with both me and Ollie, and it led us really down the rabbit hole of non-duality spiritual teachers. The lineage comes from India, and I know a lot less about the whole history of this than Sujantra does. Sujantra is very, very smart and well-versed in the history of how all of these philosophies interconnect with each other. What I know is that I encountered a spiritual teacher who was speaking language that I could connect with. And non-duality, what I really like about the approach is that it's very investigative. There's no belief required. And I think that that was something that I really struggled with in the spiritual approaches that I had been exposed to up until that time. There's, of course, yoga mythologies that have gods and characters that are allegories and that teach you about life in a similar way that the Bible does. And those can be quite useful. And then there was some other philosophical texts that I was studying before, kind of the lineage that yoga sprouted out of. Yoga, what we practice on the mats today, is a segment of the overarching yoga philosophy. And the philosophy came first. So it was very much about attuning one's entire body and mind towards the union with the divine. And non-duality was very much about, it's a similar take. They're kind of like different flavors on the same thing. But in the approaches that I'd learned before non-duality, it seemed to me, however my brain was processing the information, it seemed to me that I had to believe in something. I had to believe that this is how things work. And if I were to buy into that belief, I would be rewarded with a better life. Now, I grew up as a Lutheran Christian, a more secular branch of Lutheranism. So not super, super duper Christian, but there was more liberalism in the denomination I grew up in. And still, I kind of I was very much into the whole church thing for a long time until the middle of high school, when there was sort of a faction, a political split that happened in the church. And at that point, my family was breaking apart too. And so it was just kind of perfect storm of events. And I dropped Christianity from my life, even on a personal level. It didn't really resonate with me anymore. The stories didn't resonate with me, and I didn't have a Christian teacher in my life that I was just so deeply connected to that was carrying me forward. And so I definitely was looking for something new. And what I found in the yoga philosophies that I was studying with Sujantra really opened my eyes to this whole world of magic, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like, life can be magical. And yet there was still something about it that was like, I feel a little bit uneasy about just accepting that this is how reality is, because this book tells me that that's how it is. I didn't like that leap of faith. And when I encountered non-duality, it was all about see for yourself, look at your own experience, and become a scientist of your own experience and decide for yourself what is true based on what you can validate in your own experience. And I melted into this approach. All of the spiritual, philosophical rhetoric is really challenging. It's like you have to kind of just let your mind stew in the nonsensical, because they're asking you almost to adopt a new language in some sense. And so I remember for months listening to Mooji's talks, and then this turned into, we have 3 non-duality teachers that I've really connected with: Mooji, Rupert Spira, and Rupert's teacher, Francis Lucille, that is actually teaching and based out in Southern California, which is really interesting because you don't think about spiritual teachers as these modern day things that can live in a house and in a city. but they're there. And I remember the first months of listening to these teachers, it was very confusing. I didn't know what they were talking about, but slowly over time, I could piece things together and I could be like, oh, I understand what you mean by the word consciousness. Oh, I understand what you mean by this phrase body mind. And I could map their language into my own experience in a way that I resonated with. And I was like, yes, this is what we're talking about. And so this is where you kind of hear me and Sujantra come up against each other in some of these areas, because he might be totally right. And his frame of reference, just something is clicking in for him in a way that makes sense, that he's like, I can buy into this, in a way that either maybe I'm missing some crucial information that would make it make sense, or I'm just looking at it from a slightly different but totally valid angle. And that's what I think is so cool about these philosophical debates, because ultimately the jury is still out. We don't know what reality is. That's part of what makes this so mysterious and part of what makes death so terrifying, because there's no certainty. And that lack of certainty amps us all up. And so what I hope that you take from this is a little opening. Maybe we'll all start to look at it a little bit differently. I'm trying to wrap this up for us. I didn't write this out ahead of time. Maybe I should have. But here's what it is. It's so easy for us to think that the way we are seeing things is the way things are. And it's so healthy to have conversations where somebody else sees something in such a completely different way that has valid information as part of it that's maybe missing from my worldview. And how important is it for us to bump into that actually as much as possible? Because it builds a structure of humility deep within us, the humility of, I don't know, and sometimes I walk around pretending like I do know. And really, I think not knowing, the feeling of not knowing in my body actually feels a little bit like a relief, like some pressure, the monkey's off my back. And I hope that that's what this conversation gave to you. But of course, I'd love to learn precisely what this conversation gave to you, because you have that unique point of view that only you have with all of the information that you've accumulated throughout your life. So if you could do me a favor, in the reviews section, the comments section, or just in response to one of my recent emails, which hopefully you're on my email list. If not, you can do that. That's really easy. It'll be in the show notes for you. But if you could check in with me and let me know what little smidge of opening you got from this episode, that would be really meaningful to me to get to be close to you like that. So thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. Until next time, be well.